I'm cheap, and I don't like spending money on stuff I don't know about. Unfortunately, I really wanted a cane machete, and this was the only one I could get my hands on. So I figured I'd do a review in case anyone else was interested. Seeing as I have had just over 3 months to play around with the blade, and I have enough machetes that my co-workers avoid me at lunchtime, I felt like I was in a good enough place to make a review. I had a few concerns, like just how the hell do you film chopping leaves and stuff, and will people notice I look like a caveman because my barber moved pounds a while ago? Hopefully it adds to the bushcraft appeal, seeing as I was too lazy to drag a camera further than my backyard. Out of the box, it was clear this thing was a working tool. The blade was covered in circular grind scratches, it was wheelie patinaed in strange spots, the handle had some pretty ugly mold seams, the sheath was frayed, and any sort of flashy, cool packaging was non-existent. These were all cosmetic or easily fixed, while allowing companies to market tools to you as rustic. The worst offender was the blade grind. It was more uneven than my alternative barber's scissor work, and would have definitely compromised chopping ability if left unchecked. As a redeeming factor, this might have been the sharpest machete out of the box I've ever gotten, so that's a win, and fixing the grind with my patented, good enough system, I got to figure out how well it sharpened right away. The blade comes in at just under 14 freedom units, or around 35.5 centimeters, which in my opinion is an ideal blade length for a working all-purpose machete. The total length comes to about 20 inches, or around 50 centimeters. This is definitely one of those thin and springy machetes that all of the cool wood choppers warned you about. The blade has that signature cane knife profile with the width towards the tip. The blade's height by the handle is roughly 3.5 centimeters, or about 1 1/3 inches. The height by the tip comes out to around 8.5 centimeters, or despite what my girlfriend might say, a very respectable 3.1 inches. The edge gains a little bit of extra length with the large belly, and Svord didn't skimp on the grinding, with the blade being sharpened almost the entire length of the blade. The machete has some nice curves, giving off similar vibes to a kukri pattern, where it ends up pulling material into the cut before the belly, and afterwards the blade sits forward of your hand, giving some extra chopping power. The point of balance is roughly 40% of the way up the blade from the handle, giving the machete a nice forward balance. The spine comes out at under 2 millimeters, apparently 1.95 millimeters to be exact. I don't have a functioning pair of calipers, so I'll have to take Big Knife Store's word for it. The spine is crisp and capable of pulling fine shavings from wood, or giving you cool slow-mo shots of scraping ferro rods for your Instagram if that's what you're into. There's no distal tapering across the top, which I think is a good design choice. Not only does it keep down costs in the manufacturing process, but from my experience, machetes with distal taper tend to have a flex point closer to the handle, which, given the large belly and ridiculously flexible and springy nature of the blade, would probably lead to more flopping than a soccer player on ice skates. The blade comes with a pretty low convex edge, which is about all you can do given the thickness of the blade stock. And this is definitely more of a convex edge than a convex grind, as the blade stock is pretty consistently flat up until where the edge starts. The machete comes in at a ridiculously light 260 grams by itself, or 9.1 ounces. For reference, a cold steel SRK with all the hardware comes in at 250 grams, or 8.8 ounces. With the sheath, the Mini Cane Machete comes in totaling 485 grams, or 17.1 ounces. This means the sheath weighs almost as much as the machete does. The hook is pretty cool. Its main function is for hooking things. Mine came with a pretty sharp point. I knocked it back a bit with a file and some sandpaper as it was too sharp for my needs. I found the hook definitely extended your reach with the machete, and I found it far more efficient to pull things towards you and chop them, especially for overhead tasks on flexible materials. Bear in mind, the hook is liable to get caught in things, which can be annoying at best and dangerous at worst. If you're unsure of the danger, make sure to check the YouTube video in the description about how these types of machetes can cause injury. There's probably a bunch of super cool applications for the hook that I'm too stupid to figure out. You could lift a pot off a fire by the bale, or lash it to a stick for some hardcore survivalist style points. I was able to adapt it pretty quickly to my most common tasks. The handle is very sleek and much more of a knife handle than a machete handle in my opinion, and a Mora companion has a thicker handle. There is a nice palm swell for retention and a very interestingly shaped top guard that does prevent your hand slipping up on the blade. Probably also explains why I'm so comfortable holding it. The handle is nicely sized lengthways, and I have pretty large hands and I still had room to spare. However, it was too slender, and for pinch gripping, edge alignment can become a challenge, especially on denser materials. In its stock setup, the handle works remarkably well back to front. This is useful for using the spike, and the last time someone was this comfortable hooking, fleece-lined fishnet tights had just been invented. The worst part about the handle is the shock transfer to your hand. From tapping the handle, I'd guess the tang ends just above the lanyard hole, and this seems pretty consistent with where I felt the worst of the shock. Messing up the edge alignment or hitting on the handle side of the belly made for an unpleasant experience on harder materials. I ended up wrapping my handle in strips of bike inner tube secured by superglue, and it completely took this problem away while adding some grip. I would highly recommend doing this, and as an upside, with the handle being so thin, it adds some bulk to the handle too. The sheath is a no frills, no problems setup. It's made of fire hose material with some sort of coating and is held together with rivets. The belt loop will fit a belt of up to 3 inches. The retention straps are leather and can be pivoted out of the way. The snaps are nice quality. There is a fire steel loop which is 14 centimeters long or 5.5 inches, and other than the length, it seems custom made for a standard Sharpie's diameter. I wish Svord had put some hollow rivets along the bottom to help with lashing options, though overall, I like how the sheath adds very little in terms of bulk. The steel is a real high point for this machete, and from what I can tell, it's 15N20. Fixing the grind and restoring it to a razor edge took very little time or effort. The edge retention is fantastic as far as machetes go, and it might be the best in my collection. Even after running a day of hacking and chopping dead wood, the edge was undamaged and capable of still shaving. I will say the sharpening process was not overly fun, but this is more due to the funhouse mirror profile of the edge rather than any downside of the steel. It's not quite kukri bad, but unfortunately that is the closest comparison. Our Lord and Saviour, Danny Trejo, must have been watching over me, as in the 3+ months I've had this machete, I've yet to strike anything that might damage the edge, so I can't speak much on what might happen when a rock appears from under a bush. The one downside to the steel is corrosion resistance. By contrast, this might be the worst machete in my collection. Anything I touched or was left exposed outside of the sheath very quickly began to show the early onset of rust. I think I'll probably end up forcing a patina or using some cold glue to hopefully cut down on the maintenance. For very light vegetation, the Mini Cane Machete tended to underperform in my opinion. It will work, but I felt like I really had to go overkill with speed to get the desired results due to the forward weight. Given that I don't tend to use machetes for this kind of work, it doesn't bother me. But if you want to do exclusively grass cutting, it might be best to look for better options. For clearing light to medium vegetation, it's hard to recommend anything better. The lightness in the thin sharp blade allows for easy snap cuts that quickly clear out thin and flexible plants. For vines and tightly bunched material, the blade is easily able to cut rather than just move material around. The belly assists in pulling material into the cut, making for a very nimble, quick and effective slasher. Some people may miss the length of longer slashing machetes, but this is definitely a trade-off for the weight and ease of carry, and the ability to use the hook does seem to provide longer reach than initially expected. For greenwood and limbing, this blade also performs well above its weight. The big belly is able to easily clear out thinner limbs, while being able to chop through impressively thick pieces of green wood. This machete would really be of great use for camp projects or shelter building based around light materials, as it really excels at these tasks, especially for its size and lightweight. For such a light tool, this thing really has a deep bite on softer green woods. In terms of harder chopping, I put this to the test cutting some very seasoned dead sanguine peach tree limbs. Sanguine peach is a hardwood, and this was deader and drier than a comic from the teens. I did start to struggle with edge alignment and hand chop, The edge alignment could be put down to either the flex in the blade, the thinness of the handle, or user error, as this style of blade shape does come with a bit of a learning curve. In the stock setup, handle shock will become a factor after a while, and I did notice that the blade contact area made a big difference to the shock felt. Overall, the edge seemed to clear chips out pretty well, all things considered. The blade grind definitely helped the machete not to get stuck, but when it did bite deep, the flexibility made it pretty awkward to clear out. The blade forward geometry likely helped a lot with the chopping performance. It wasn't the most comfortable or speedy experience, but to be honest, the fact that a roughly quarter of a kilo tool was able to chop through dead hardwood in any capacity is pretty impressive, and in a pinch, this machete can definitely punch above its weight. For splitting, I think wood selection is going to be the biggest factor here. I pre-split some Douglas fir into smaller chunks, as I didn't think that the machete would split as well as it ended up doing, and to be honest, I regret doing this a little bit. Granted, this is straight-grained, knot-free softwood, but it is dry, and it actually really exceeded my expectations. Again, the blade forward geometry probably aided a lot here. I think if you can chop through the wood to split it in one hit, you might have some success. But for anything tougher than an initial chop, you'll probably run into problems. Again, the flexibility and low rigidity made it difficult to add twisting motions to help split wood once the knife was sunk in. I didn't do any hard batoning because there really didn't seem to be much point. I'm experienced enough to know that a short blade grind with a relatively tall and flat blade is not going to baton well. Add the flexibility into the mix, and anything challenging is going to be a big problem for this knife. With that being said, for lighter batoning, the thinness of the blade lends it to creating excellent pieces of fine kindling. For rough block carving, the machete did very well. The belly was big enough to remove material, but the machete is light enough to use quickly and accurately. I never felt like I was fighting against the tool to stay on course. However, due to the light weight of the tool, you're going to be limited in removing large amounts of material quickly, so there certainly is a trade-off. Fine carving was pretty good as far as machetes go. I feel like I have nicer machetes to carve with, but the convex edge bit into the wood really nicely, and I was able to create some pretty nice shavings in a pretty quick amount of time. The fact the edge goes pretty close to the handle and the overall light weight meant the machete was pretty maneuverable and carved decently, at least as far as big knives go. In theory, tip work should be fantastic. The steel is great and it sharpens nicely, but due to the design, the tip curves upwards slightly, reducing the fineness of the point. The tip is also usually the first to impact if you end up doing hard chopping on any sort of block. So while it is possible that the tip could be refined to be another super sharp portion of the blade to be used for tasks like game prep or fine tip tasks, in practicality it tends to take a lot of abuse, which will likely impact its ability to hold a workable edge for extended lengths of time. The machete's design also lends itself well to being used as a draw knife. The broken back section leading into the spike makes for a nice handhold, and the curves of the blade make for efficient cutting sections to remove material. Again, there's probably a bunch of uses to explore and ways of using the hook. To sum it up, if you're looking for a 1-2 option, you'll likely be disappointed by this machete. To make an analogy, it's kind of like a hatchback. Like if you need to move a washing machine, it'll definitely do it. If you need to move washing machines on a daily basis, you're probably better off getting a truck. In saying that, you could quite feasibly replace a pack axe for this machete and a light axe or hatchet for essentially the same weight, but with a large increase in versatility. The Svord Mini Cane Machete has excellent steel. It's lightweight and it can be pressed into harder rolls when it needs to be. It suffers from the inability to do hard tasks for extended use due to the ridiculous hand shock transfer and the overly flexible, light nature of the blade. If Svord made a version in slightly thicker blade stock with some sort of rubber overmold on the handle, I think this really could be a top tier outdoors tool. I paid just over $70 for this machete in the sheath. While where I live, Condor's entry to mid-level offerings range from about $90 to $120. The stock of Tramontinas tend to range from just under $30 to nearly $45, depending on whether you're getting on with a sheath or not. In the current market, it's hard to find the price of this Svord unfair or unreasonable in comparison to its competitors. The Mini Cane Machete is definitely capable of harder use tasks when it needs to be, but it really isn't the best tool for the job. It definitely has more of a specialist vibe than that of an all-rounder. It lacks the heft and stiffness to function well as a dedicated heavy chopper, especially unmodified. However, it is good at light tasks and is fantastic for medium work. It might be rough around the edges and lack some finesse at certain rolls, but for what it was designed for, it really is an excellent tool. Even when pushing it into tasks it wasn't designed for, it's hard not to be slightly impressed considering how lightweight the tool is. If you don't own any other machetes, it's hard to recommend this as a first option. If you're looking for purely a garden tool, you'll probably want something longer, even if the hook is a nice range extender. But if you're looking for an easy to carry trail clearer with some great steel that you can press into some occasional harder chopping, it really is a solid option, just as long as you know what you're buying. Overall, I'm glad I pulled the trigger, and I would rate this machete as a high B+ to a low A-. If you have any questions about it, please let me know. Peace.